My own brother stole my identity, now he's begging me not to ruin his life. But I refuse to stay silent. And my family thinks I'm the villain for exposing him. I always believed that family was supposed to have your back. That no matter what happened, blood meant something. It was one of those values drilled into me from childhood, a core belief that I carried with me through every argument, every disagreement, every moment of doubt. That belief shattered the moment I picked up the phone and heard a voice from my bank informing me that I owed thousands of dollars on a loan I had never taken out. At first, I struggled to process the words. It had to be a mistake, some kind of system error. I was meticulous with my finances, never reckless, never the kind of person to forget something as massive as a loan. But as the details poured in, a cold realization settled over me. The documents were there. My signature was on them. My personal information had been used. And worst of all, the money had gone into an account I had never touched. The logical part of my brain tried to untangle it. There had to be another explanation, something other than the conclusion that loomed like a dark storm cloud in the back of my mind. But deep down, beneath the shock and confusion, I already knew. Adam. The name surfaced like a bitter memory I had tried to suppress. My younger brother, the one I had always trusted, always protected. The one I had sacrificed for more times than I could count. The thought alone made my stomach twist. It couldn't be him. It shouldn't be him. But I knew better than to ignore the obvious. The weight of betrayal crushed down on me like a vice. It wasn't just about the money, or the debt now suffocating my future. It was about everything that had come before it, all the times I had put him first, all the times I had stepped in when he needed help, all the times I had believed he would never do something like this to me. And yet, the evidence was right in front of me, undeniable and cruel. I stared at my phone, my fingers numb as I scrolled through my contacts. Adam's name sat there, familiar and mocking. I hesitated, torn between the desperate hope that there was some other explanation and the undeniable rage building in my chest. Calling him wouldn't change the truth. It wouldn't undo what he had done. But I needed to hear it from him. I needed to understand how the brother I had spent my life looking out for had decided that I was nothing more than an easy target. I pressed the button. The call connected. And everything I thought I knew about my family, about my brother, about the unshakable bond we had, shattered in an instant. The weight of what I had just learned clung to me like a sickness I couldn't shake. My stomach twisted with the slow, creeping realization that this wasn't some mistake. There was no misunderstanding, no clerical error. This was deliberate. Calculated. The kind of betrayal that didn't happen by accident. I sat in silence, gripping the edges of my desk as the world around me blurred. The bank had already confirmed the details. The documents had my signature, perfectly forged. The loan had been approved months ago, and the money had disappeared almost immediately into an account with my name attached. But I had never seen that account. I had never touched that money. And yet, I was the one responsible for repaying it. The betrayal settled deeper, wrapping around my ribs like barbed wire. It was Adam. Of course, it was Adam. There was no one else who could have done this, no one else who had access to the kind of personal information necessary to pull something like this off. He knew my social security number. He knew my financial habits, my credit history, my weaknesses. I had trusted him, confided in him, given him everything without hesitation. And now, that trust had been turned into a weapon against me. Memories flooded my mind, each one like a cruel reminder of how much I had given him over the years. Late-night calls when he needed money for rent, for food, for some vague emergency he never fully explained. The times I had covered for him when he missed a payment, loaned him cash without expecting it back, convinced myself that it was just what an older brother was supposed to do. He had always been the one who struggled more, the one who never quite got his footing in the adult world. And I had been the one to pick up the pieces, to remind him that he wasn't alone, to make sure he had a safety net. But now, I wasn't his safety net. I was his victim. The betrayal hit in waves. The first was disbelief, the aching hope that there was some other explanation. Then came the anger, sharp and suffocating, the kind that made my hands shake as I clenched my fists. And beneath it all, there was something worse. Something uglier. Shame. Shame that I had let this happen. That I had believed in him so blindly. That I had trusted him with things no one else would have, and he had taken that trust and twisted it into something that left me drowning in debt. I felt my pulse hammering in my skull as I forced myself to think clearly. The loan wasn't small. The numbers made my chest tighten just looking at them. This wasn't something I could brush off or handle quietly. It wasn't a favor I could cover like all the times before. This was real: banks, legal consequences, financial ruin. And the worst part? Adam had never said a word. No apologies. No warnings. No explanations. The anger sharpened. I needed to hear it from him. I needed him to say it, to acknowledge what he had done, to face me instead of hiding behind forged paperwork and stolen money. I had spent my life protecting him, but I wasn't going to protect him from this. I would find out the truth, one way or another. I didn't waste time. I showed up at Adam's place that evening, my heart pounding with a fury I could barely contain. Every step up to his apartment felt heavier, as if I was carrying the weight of every stupid time I had trusted him, every moment I had convinced myself that he wouldn't take advantage of me. The second he opened the door, I knew. The guilt was written all over his face, the way his eyes darted away from mine, the way his shoulders stiffened like he had already prepared an excuse. He knew why I was here. He had been waiting for this. But instead of admitting anything, he played dumb. He acted surprised, confused, as if he had no idea what I was talking about. He shook his head, pretended to be offended at the accusation. He even had the nerve to act hurt, like I was out of line for coming to him with something so serious. I felt my jaw clench so tight it hurt. I told him what the bank said. I listed the details, the forged documents, the missing money. His face barely flickered, but I knew him too well. There was no real shock there. Just calculation. He doubled down. Swore up and down that it wasn't him. That maybe someone else got hold of my information. That I should check with the bank again. That he would never do something like that. The way he said it, so smooth, so sure of himself, made my stomach twist. He was good at this. Too good. I felt sick. I had always known Adam could lie when it suited him, but this was different. This wasn't some harmless excuse to get out of trouble. This was something bigger. Something unforgivable. And still, he kept going. Kept insisting that I had the wrong person, that I was making a mistake, that I should calm down before doing something I'd regret. As if I was the problem. The realization hit hard. He wasn't going to admit it. He wasn't going to take responsibility. No matter how much proof I had, no matter how deep he had buried me in debt, he would never look me in the eye and tell me the truth. Because to him, I wasn't his brother. I was a resource. A tool. Something to be used and discarded. For the first time in my life, I saw him for what he really was. And I hated him for it. I stood there, waiting for him to crack, for the mask to slip, for even the slightest hint of remorse to show. But all I got was the same routine, his wide-eyed disbelief, his indignant tone, his careful phrasing meant to plant doubt in my head. He was good at this. He had always been good at this. And then, when he realized I wasn't buying it, he changed tactics. His voice softened. His shoulders sagged. Suddenly, he wasn't the scheming liar anymore, he was the victim. He shook his head, muttered about how hard things had been for him, about how I didn't understand, about how life hadn't been as easy for him as it was for me. He dropped hints about overdue bills, about bad luck, about people constantly expecting too much from him. I watched him switch roles effortlessly, turning himself into the helpless little brother, the struggling underdog who had been forced into an impossible situation. He said I didn't get it. That I had always had my life together, always had stability, while he had been left to fend for himself. Like I hadn't been the one helping him for years. Like I hadn't been the one keeping him afloat every time he screwed up. I felt something in me snap. He wasn't just lying, he was twisting it. Making it seem like I was the one being cruel, like I was the one who didn't care, like I was heartless for confronting him about the damage he had done. And the worst part? I could see how easy it would be for someone else to believe him. But I wasn't someone else. I knew exactly who he was. The pity act might have worked on our parents, on friends, on whatever poor idiot he had been leeching off before this, but it wasn't going to work on me. Not this time. I had given him every chance to do the right thing. To admit it. To take responsibility. But instead, he stood there, manipulating the situation like it was just another problem he could talk his way out of. It was in that moment that I realized something awful. He wasn't sorry. He never would be. I left his apartment without another word. There was no point in arguing with someone who refused to feel guilt, no point in reasoning with someone who had already decided that I was the villain in his story. The rage stayed with me, thick and suffocating, pressing against my ribs like something alive. But the worst was yet to come. It didn't take long for the calls to start. First, it was our mother. Her voice carried that same disappointed tone she always used when I refused to play along with the family script, when I didn't give Adam the benefit of the doubt, when I wasn't understanding enough. She said I had blown things out of proportion, that Adam was struggling, that I should have handled it privately instead of cornering him. As if I was the one who had done something wrong. I could already picture her sitting at the kitchen table, shaking her head, wondering aloud where she had gone wrong with me. Not with him, not with the son who had committed fraud and stolen from his own brother, but with me, for daring to confront him about it. I let her talk, let her weave the same tired narrative she had always clung to, the one where Adam was the troubled but good-hearted son who just needed a little more patience, a little more love, a little more sacrifice from everyone around him. And when she was done, when she finally gave me a chance to respond, I told her something that made her gasp like I had struck her across the face. I wasn't letting this go. She tried again, this time softening her voice, asking me to think about what this would do to Adam's future. What if the bank pressed charges? What if this followed him for the rest of his life? What if he lost everything? As if I wasn't the one drowning because of his actions. I hung up. But it didn't stop there. The next call came from our father, quieter, more measured, but carrying the same message underneath. He wasn't defending Adam, not exactly, but he wanted me to consider the bigger picture. Was this really worth tearing the family apart? Couldn't we figure out another way? Wasn't there a way to fix this without making it worse? And then came the texts. The ones from cousins, aunts, family friends. Subtle at first, just checking in, just wanting to hear my side of the story, but they weren't neutral. They had already chosen their side before they even reached out. I could see it so clearly now. Adam had played his part well. He had spun a version of events where he wasn't a thief, but a desperate man who had made a mistake. And I was the cold, unforgiving older brother, the one who was willing to destroy his own family over money. It was sickening. For years, I had believed that family meant having each other's backs. That no matter what, we protected one another. But now, I saw the truth. Family first only applied when it was convenient for them. Because when I was the one suffering, when I was the one backed into a corner, drowning in debt because of Adam's actions, where was that same loyalty? It didn't exist. They didn't want justice. They wanted silence. They wanted me to swallow this whole, to take on the burden alone, so that they wouldn't have to deal with the discomfort of a fractured family. But I was done being their scapegoat. The pressure was relentless. The calls, the messages, the thinly veiled accusations, they didn't stop. Everyone had something to say, everyone had an opinion about what I should do. And none of them seemed to care about what had actually happened. It wasn't about right or wrong anymore. It was about keeping the family intact, about maintaining the illusion that we were still whole, that nothing had shattered beneath the surface. But I had to make a choice. If I reported Adam, I knew what would happen. The fraud investigation would be swift. The bank would dig into everything, and once they confirmed what I already knew, that my own brother had stolen my identity, forged my signature, and taken money in my name, he would face real consequences. Legal consequences. Jail time wasn't off the table. And I could already hear my mother's voice trembling with horror, could already picture my father rubbing his temples in frustration, my aunts whispering about how I had ruined my own brother's life. As if I had forced him to do this. As if I had put the pen in his hand and told him to sign my name. But if I didn't report him, I would have to pay off the loan myself. Thousands of dollars. Money I hadn't borrowed, money I hadn't touched, money that would cripple me financially for years. I could fight it, try to dispute it with the bank, but without an official fraud report, it would be my word against theirs. And Adam? He would walk away unscathed. He wouldn't learn a lesson. He wouldn't feel guilty. He wouldn't lose sleep over what he had done to me. He would move on, untouched, ready to do it again the next time he needed a way out. I had spent my entire life cleaning up his messes, carrying the weight of his bad decisions. But this wasn't spilled milk or missed rent or a favor he forgot to repay. This was theft. This was my future he had gambled with. And if I let this slide, I knew exactly what would happen. They would expect me to forgive and forget. They would tell me it was in the past, that family meant letting things go, that he had learned his lesson even if he never apologized, even if he never acknowledged what he had done. But I wasn't sure I could live with that. I thought about calling Adam one last time. Giving him a final chance to make it right, to take responsibility, to show even the smallest sign that he understood what he had done. But deep down, I already knew how that would go. He would deny. He would deflect. He would cry about how I was ruining his life. And he wouldn't mean a single word of it. For the first time in my life, I saw things clearly. I had two choices. I could take on the debt myself, stay silent, and let my family keep their illusion of unity intact. Or I could burn the bridge completely, report the fraud, and let Adam face the consequences of his own actions. Either way, something would break. But the difference was, this time, I wasn't going to be the one left picking up the pieces. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became, there was no good outcome. No matter what I did, I would be the villain. If I reported Adam, I would be the brother who destroyed his own family. My mother would cry, my father would be disappointed, and everyone else would make sure I never forgot what I had done. I could already hear their voices, their judgment, their disgust. If I let it go, I would be the brother who allowed himself to be used. The fool. The idiot who let his own blood rob him blind. Adam would move on without a scratch while I spent the next several years suffocating under a debt I never asked for. I didn't even realize how tightly I was gripping my phone until my hands started to ache. No matter which way I turned, I lost. I spent the next few days trying to keep my head above water, trying to act like everything was fine while my entire world felt like it was caving in. Work became unbearable. The stress seeped into every part of my life, clouding my thoughts, making it impossible to focus. I was constantly checking my phone, dreading the next call from a family member, dreading the next message trying to guilt me into silence. And Adam? He didn't reach out once. Not a single word. No attempt to fix what he had done. No offer to make things right. Just silence. It made my blood boil. He knew I was drowning, and he didn't care. The final straw came when I checked my bank account one morning and saw the first repayment notice for the loan. Seeing that number on the screen, watching as my financial stability began to crumble in real time, that was when it all snapped into place. Adam was never going to stop. If I let this go, if I took the hit and stayed quiet, he would see it as permission. Next time, it would be something worse. Next time, he would steal more, take bigger risks, push it even further, because he knew I would fold. He had spent his entire life knowing I would always be there to clean up the mess. But this time, there was no cleaning it up. I had only one option left. And no matter how much my family hated me for it, no matter how much backlash I got, I was done protecting him. Filing the fraud report was easier than I expected. There was no dramatic scene, no moment of hesitation at the last second. I walked into the bank, sat down with an agent, and laid everything out. They took it seriously immediately. The forged signatures, the fraudulent account, the transfer of funds, all of it pointed to identity theft, and there was no question about what needed to happen next. The words law enforcement investigation were mentioned more than once. The reality of it hit me in waves, but I didn't back down. I signed the necessary paperwork. The bank would freeze the fraudulent account, launch an internal investigation, and work with the authorities. There was a chance, a small chance, that I wouldn't be held responsible for the loan once they confirmed I hadn't been the one who signed for it. But that would take time, and until then, my credit was trashed, my financial future uncertain. I walked out of that office knowing that there was no undoing what I had just set in motion. By the time I got home, the news had already spread. My mother called first, her voice high and panicked. She wasn't asking if I was okay, she was begging me to withdraw the report. She kept saying that Adam wasn't a criminal, that he had just made a mistake, that I was about to ruin his entire life over something that could be fixed within the family. I didn't say a word. I just let her talk herself into circles, listening as she twisted it into something smaller than it was. Like he had borrowed from me. Like this was something I could forgive. Like I was being cruel for not letting it go. Then came the guilt-tripping. The reminders that Adam was still my brother, that I was supposed to protect him, that this would tear the family apart. And still, not once did she acknowledge what he had done to me. I told her no. She gasped like I had slapped her. Then, the anger came. The real anger, the part she had been holding back. She accused me of being cold, of being selfish, of wanting to ruin Adam's life out of spite. I hung up. The texts came next. Some from family, some from mutual friends Adam had gotten to believe his version of events. They called me heartless, said I was overreacting, said I should have handled this privately. Not a single person asked if I was okay. Not a single person acknowledged that I was the victim here. But I wasn't surprised. This was exactly how it had always been. Adam could do whatever he wanted because there was always someone willing to excuse it. But not this time. I sat in the silence of my apartment, staring at my phone as the messages kept flooding in, knowing that I had burned the bridge for good. And despite everything, despite the anger, the hurt, the weight of it all pressing down on me, I didn't regret it. The messages didn't stop. They came in waves, some furious, some pleading, but all of them carried the same underlying message: fix this before it's too late. Too late for who? Certainly not for me. It had been too late for me the second Adam decided I wasn't his brother, just a name he could slap on forged paperwork. Too late the second he sat across from me and lied without a flicker of shame. Too late the second my own family decided that keeping him safe mattered more than the fact that he had gutted my future. My father called next. His tone was colder than my mother's had been, less pleading, more disappointed. He asked if I had really done it, if I had actually reported Adam to the authorities. When I told him yes, the silence on the other end was heavy. Then he told me I had made a mistake. Not Adam. Me. He said I was destroying our family. That I was the one escalating things, making this into something worse than it needed to be. That Adam would have found a way to pay me back eventually, that I should have just given him time. I asked him how much time he thought was reasonable. A month? A year? 10 years? I asked him how much money I was supposed to let Adam take before someone in this family actually held him accountable. I asked him if it would have been different if it had happened to someone else. If I had been the one to steal, would they have fought so hard to defend me? He didn't answer. Instead, he sighed. A long, tired, disappointed sigh, like I was just another burden he had to deal with. He told me that no matter what happened next, I would have to live with the consequences of my choice. Then he hung up. I stared at my phone for a long time, gripping it so tightly my fingers ached. The weight of it all crashed down on me at once, the finality of it. I had always been the one to mend things, the one to step up, the one to hold everything together when Adam tore it apart. But now, they saw me as the one who had broken everything. I had always known my parents favored Adam. But I had never truly understood what that meant until now. It meant that no matter what he did, no matter how badly he hurt me, I was expected to forgive. But I wasn't going to. Not this time. This time, he would face the consequences. The day the police came for Adam, my phone lit up with more messages than I had ever seen in my life. Family members who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly had plenty to say. Some begged. Some raged. Some hurled insults, calling me cold, cruel, unforgiving. But not a single one of them asked if I was okay. Not one person acknowledged that I had been the victim in all of this. Adam was arrested at his apartment. I wasn't there to see it, but I heard about it soon enough. He had screamed, cursed, called them every name in the book. He acted shocked, outraged that someone had actually followed through and made him face the consequences of his actions. Even with the truth laid out in front of him, the forged documents, the bank's evidence, the undeniable proof, he still acted like he was the one being wronged. That was who he had always been. He spent years gambling with my loyalty, and he had finally lost. The fallout was worse than I had imagined. My parents told me I was no longer welcome in their home. Not because I had lied, but because I had refused to lie for Adam. My mother sobbed about how I had turned my back on my own blood. My father refused to speak to me at all. Family members cut me off, blocked me, erased me like I had never existed. To them, I had done something unforgivable. But I didn't care. Because for the first time in my life, I was free. No more guilt. No more expectations. No more playing the part of the responsible, dependable older brother who was always there to clean up the mess. Adam had spent his entire life taking from me. This time, he had taken too much. And I was done letting him. I wasn't his safety net anymore. I wasn't his lifeline. I wasn't his brother. I was just another person he had used. And now, I was the one who finally walked away. For good.